I showed up to my parents' lavish 60th wedding anniversary party, thinking I could endure 5 quiet minutes just long enough for my mother to see I hadn't forgotten her. But the moment I stepped inside, whispers cut through the room like glass. There's the frigid daughter. The one who can't do anything right. My father pretended I wasn't there. My sister smirked, lifted her champagne glass, and ordered security to remove me like I was an intruder in a family I was born into. They had no idea. I owned 31% of their company. And in the next 72 hours, everything they built would crumble. This is the story of the night humiliation turned into power, and how walking away became the bravest thing I ever did. If you were standing in my place that night, what would you have done? And where are you watching from today? I was 6 years old the first time I understood that in the Carter family, love was not something everyone received equally. We lived in a gray stone house in the West Hills of Portland, the kind of place people drove past and whispered, "Who lives there?" Inside, though, the air was always heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for my father's mood to decide whether the night would be peaceful or sharp enough to cut skin. My name is Madeline Carter, though for most of my childhood, everyone called me Maddie. To my father, Richard Carter, the man who built Carter House, one of the biggest retail empires on the West Coast, I was mostly the other one. The daughter who didn't quite fit the glossy family portrait he spent his life curating. If Alexis, my older sister, was the perfect frame blonde, charming, good at smiling on cue, then I was the smudge he could never fully erase. Richard Carter was a man carved from stone, tall, immovable, and convinced the world revolved correctly only when he controlled every voice in the room. He liked his shirt starched, his schedule obeyed, his family polished. He spoke in statements, not sentences, and he believed emotions were weaknesses you let strangers exploit. My mother, Eleanor, existed in the soft spaces between his commands. She spoke quietly, moved gently, and smiled in the way people smile when they are trying not to cause trouble. She loved us, me and Alexis, but Richard's presence always made her love something she had to hide, something she delivered in shadows and late-night whispers. With Alexis, though, my father had no hesitations. She was beautiful. She was clever. She spoke well. Everything about her fit his blueprint of a Carter heir, graceful, social, full of effortless charm. At family dinners, he praised her school projects like she'd won the Nobel Prize. When she walked into a room, he softened. When I walked in, he measured. I wasn't like Alexis. I liked wires, gears, circuits, puzzles. I liked quiet. I liked the way robots made sense when people didn't. To my father, those things made me odd, emotionless, cold as a freezer. He called it joking. I learned it as identity. The worst part was not the words, it was the way everyone accepted them, the way Alexis laughed just enough to please him, the way my mother bowed her head and stayed silent even when her eyes flashed with apology. That silence taught me something. In our house, love existed, but courage did not. The clearest memory of that time was the day I won first place in my school's robotics fair. I was 10. I had spent weeks building a small machine that could sort colored blocks faster than any of the other kids' designs. It wasn't perfect, I had soldered half the wires in the dark, but it worked, and when my name was announced, I felt something warm bloom in my chest. I imagined, just for a second, that I might walk into our kitchen and see pride on my father's face. Pride that belonged to me and not to Alexis. But when I held out the medal, still warm from my hand, he didn't even look up from the newspaper. Robotics? He scoffed. It's a children's hobby, Maddie. Don't get carried away. Your sister's debate trophy, that's what matters. That shows talent. That shows leadership. What you're doing, it's nothing serious. Just like that, the warmth disappeared. Alexis smirked. My mother stood frozen behind him, her fingers tightening around the dish towel she was holding. She opened her mouth for a moment. I truly believed she might defend me, but then my father gave her a single sharp glance, and she fell back into silence. The same silence she'd lived inside her whole marriage. I didn't cry. I learned early that tears only made him call me dramatic. So I swallowed it, the way I swallowed everything else. That night, when the house was quiet and Richard was asleep, my mother slipped into my room. She walked softly, as if even the floorboards might betray her. She sat on the edge of my bed and held out a small carved wooden box I'd never seen before. "For you," she whispered. Inside, she placed the medal, the one my father had dismissed without a second glance. Her hands lingered on it, trembling a little. "You should keep it. What you built today, that was real. That was yours. I'm proud of you, Maddie. Even if I can't always say it." Her voice cracked on those last words, and something in me cracked with her. I nodded, unable to speak. I wanted to hug her, but even at 10 I understood that she lived in a world where even affection had to be rationed carefully. She kissed my forehead, quick and light, and slipped out just as quietly as she'd come. As I held the wooden box against my chest, I understood two lessons that would follow me long after childhood ended. From my father, I learned, you're not good enough. From my mother, I learned, you deserve to be loved, even if I'm too afraid to show it in daylight. Both lessons carved themselves into me, one as a wound, one as a promise. And, for years, I didn't know which one would shape my life more. By the time I turned 13, the hierarchy in our family wasn't just implied, it was institutionalized. Alexis had become the perfect heir, a title my father repeated so often it sounded like a family slogan. He trained her with the meticulousness of someone grooming royalty. How to shake hands firmly but not aggressively, how to greet board members at company holiday parties, how to tilt her head when she laughed, so she looked approachable in photographs. He taught her which wines paired well with which cuts of meat, what color dress conveyed authority without seeming arrogant, and how to speak to men twice her age as if she were their equal without actually challenging them. My sister absorbed it all with the glossy ease of someone who knew she was favored, someone who had never once questioned whether she belonged. Meanwhile, I was the quiet shadow moving along the edges of their perfectly choreographed world. I still liked robotics and coding, though by then it was less of a hobby and more of a language I understood better than English. Circuits made sense. Robots didn't lie. Computers didn't punish you for speaking out of turn. So one afternoon, at the dining table, when my father asked what I planned to do as an elective for the new school year, I told him, stupidly hopeful, that I wanted to join the computer science club and maybe take an intro programming course. He didn't look up from reviewing Carter House quarterly reports. "Absolutely not," he said flatly. "Don't waste your time on things that won't matter. This family does not produce bookworms." They had no idea. I owned 31% of their company. And in the next 72 hours, everything they built would crumble. This is the story of the night humiliation turned into power, and how walking away became the bravest thing I ever did. If you were standing in my place that night, what would you have done? And where are you watching from today? I was 6 years old the first time I understood that in the Carter family, love was not something everyone received equally. It might sings. My mother, who had been setting a bowl of salad on the table, paused at the edge of my peripheral vision. She inhaled slightly, the way she always did when she gathered the courage to speak. "Richard," she said quietly, "maybe." He didn't even turn his head. Just a single, razor-sharp glance in her direction. That was all it took. She lowered her gaze, smoothed the edge of the napkin, and fell back into silence. Alexis glanced at me with something between pity and superiority, an expression she'd perfected by 13, and I felt my cheeks burn, though not from shame. From recognition. I knew then that in our house, speaking up was a luxury neither of us truly had. Dinner became the place where the unspoken rules were displayed most clearly. My father believed seating positions reflected order and discipline. Alexis sat to his right, the place of honor. I sat on his left, the place he once told me was for the child who needs guidance. Guidance. As if I was some malfunctioning machine he was still trying to troubleshoot. Sometimes, when I'd lift my fork, I could feel his eyes on me, measuring the smallest actions. How I held my utensils, how I breathed, how I existed. Over the years, the divide between my sister and me grew like a fault line splitting the family in two. My father called Alexis the pride of the Carters, his legacy, the daughter who understands what it means to represent this family. He said those lines in front of guests, in front of employees, at holiday dinners, at church. And me? I became the work in progress, the one he believed needed fixing. My personality, my interests, my silence, my awkwardness. All of it was a flaw he wanted to correct, like I was a defective product rolling off a conveyor belt. Alexis began to lean into her role more aggressively during those years. Whenever she sensed my father was irritated with me, she'd step in with a perfectly rehearsed comment or a laugh just sharp enough to signal she was on his side. She didn't bully me physically, she didn't have to. She mirrored him, his condescension, his tone, his language. And in a house where love flowed in one direction only, imitating him was the fastest path to approval. But late at night, after the dinner plates were washed and the house fell into its usual heavy quiet, my mother would knock gently on my door. "It's me," she'd whisper, like she needed permission to enter her own daughter's room. She always brought something small, a slice of strawberry cake from a bakery she liked, a warm cookie she'd baked earlier in the day, sometimes just a cup of chamomile tea held carefully in both hands. She never turned on the light. She'd sit beside me on the bed in the faint glow from the hallway and ask how my day was. She always asked in past tense, like she already knew it hadn't been good. She only brought those things when she was certain my father was asleep. I knew this because she always checked the hallway twice before closing my door. We didn't talk much, she couldn't risk saying the wrong thing, but she listened, and sometimes that was enough to make the loneliness less suffocating. She would brush a loose strand of hair behind my ear, or rest her hand on my back for just a moment before pulling it away like she'd touched fire. "You're doing just fine, sweetheart," she'd whisper. "You're exactly who you're supposed to be." I clung to those words like a lifeline, because during the day I heard a very different message, from my father, that I wasn't enough, from my sister, that I was an embarrassment, from the house itself, that there was no room for someone like me. By the time I turned 18, the hierarchy in our family was no longer just emotional, it had become structural, woven into every rule, every expectation, every breath inside the Carter household. Alexis was already being groomed for a formal role at Carter House. My father took her to leadership retreats, board luncheons, and investor golf outings, proudly introducing her as the future of the brand. Meanwhile, he treated me like an afterthought hidden behind the curtains, someone whose existence he tolerated only because it was too inconvenient not to. But for reasons I still can't fully explain, hope, delusion, desperation, I decided to apply for a summer internship at Carter House the moment I graduated high school. I had spent the last 4 years quietly building coding projects, entering small competitions, volunteering at the local library's tech workshops. Part of me believed that if I showed Richard my work not as a daughter, but as a candidate, he might see me differently, see potential, not problems. I never even got a chance to submit the application. My father found the printed form on the kitchen counter before I could bring it to HR. "No," he said without looking up. "You're not interning at Carter House." I swallowed. "Dad, I just want a chance." There is nothing here for you," he cut in sharply. "Alexis has a path. You don't. And this company doesn't have time to babysit your hobbies." Hobbies. That was how he described the years I spent building robots and coding small programs until my eyes burned from the screen. "Dad, I can contribute." I said no. He folded the application in half, then into quarters, then into something so small it barely existed. "If you want to play with computers, do it somewhere else. Carter House needs people with real leadership potential." Of course, Alexis overheard everything. She walked in wearing a perfectly tailored blazer, even though she had nowhere to go that day. She smirked like the decision was always obvious. "Dad's right," she added sweetly. "Carter House needs people with substance. Not, well, whatever it is you do." I almost walked away. I should have, but something in me, some naive part still reaching for a father who had never once reached back, wanted him to reconsider. "Can I at least show you my portfolio?" "Just to..." "Maddie," he said, tone dripping with impatience, "stop embarrassing yourself." The words hit harder than he probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard as he wanted them to. A week later, Alexis ordered me, really, to join her in the main conference room during one of the department meetings. I thought maybe she wanted to help, or at least ease the tension. Instead, it became the moment I understood, with brutal clarity, that I would never belong in that world. The room was full of supervisors and mid-level managers. My father stood at the head of the long table, speaking about expansion goals and market trends. Alexis sat beside him like a crowned princess. I took a seat near the back, trying to make myself small, trying not to draw attention. Halfway through the meeting, Alexis looked directly at me, then at the managers. "In case anyone's wondering," she announced with a bright, polished smile, "my sister here asked to intern with us this summer." A few people chuckled politely. My stomach dropped. "But don't worry," she continued lightly. "Carter House needs people with actual potential. Not amateur coders who don't understand the real world." The room was silent for 2 beats, long enough for me to feel every pair of eyes on me, long enough for humiliation to settle deep in my bones. My mother stood near the doorway, holding a folder so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She looked like she wanted to speak, her mouth even opened slightly, but then my father gave her that familiar, silencing glance, and she froze like glass under threat of shattering. I felt something inside me collapse, a quiet breaking, a private one. The kind that doesn't make noise, but changes everything. I walked out of the meeting without saying a word. That night, the rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof, slipping down the windows in long, trembling trails. I sat on my bed, staring at the wooden box that held my robotics medal, the one my mother had saved for me years earlier. I opened it, closed it, opened it again. The weight of it felt like both proof and punishment. Proof that I wasn't useless, punishment that the people I wanted to value it never would. My door creaked softly, and my mother stepped in. Her face was pale, eyes red like she had been holding back tears all evening. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat beside me, as she had so many nights before, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for mine. "Maddie," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I breathed in slowly. "It's okay, Mom." "No," she said, shaking her head. "It isn't. You deserved better today. You've always deserved better." Then she slipped a small envelope into the pocket of my jacket. I could hear the faint crinkle of bills inside. "There's $500. It's not much, but it's what I can give. I don't know how long it will last you, but—" Her voice broke. "I believe in you. Even if I've been too afraid to show it." For the first time in years, I hugged her, really hugged her. Not a soft, hidden midnight touch, but a desperate, crushing embrace. Her tears soaked my shoulder. Mine soaked hers. Downstairs, my father's voice echoed faintly through the hall. "Let her go if she wants to go," he said. "We'll see how long she lasts without this family." That was the moment the last thread snapped. I packed quietly. A few shirts, my laptop, the wooden box, a change of jeans, 2 notebooks. My mother stood in the doorway, one hand over her mouth, the other pressed against her heart like she was trying to keep it from falling apart. "You come back anytime," she whispered. "Or never, whatever keeps you safe." "It's an arch." I nodded, pulled my hood over my head, and stepped out into the storm. The rain soaked through my jacket within seconds. The driveway was slick, the streetlights blurred. But as I walked away from the Carter house, the house that had never felt like home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not confidence. Not freedom. Resolve. The kind that is born not from being loved, but from surviving without it. Seattle was never part of the plan. It wasn't even my first choice or my second. It was simply the farthest city I could reach on the limited money I had, the place where I could disappear without being traced back to the Carter name. When the bus rolled into King Street Station the next morning, my clothes were still damp from the Portland rain, my backpack felt heavier than it should have, and every part of me ached from not sleeping. I remember stepping onto the sidewalk with no idea where to go next. For the first time in my life, there were no instructions, no rules, no Richard Carter telling me what to wear, how to sit, who to become. Just air, unfiltered, cold, sharp, and the terrifying freedom of having nothing. The first year was brutal. I found a room to rent from a retired teacher who didn't ask many questions and thankfully didn't watch the news. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise and took whatever work I could find. I bussed tables at a diner where the smell of grease clung to my hair long after my shift ended. I stocked shelves at a 24-hour pharmacy from midnight to 4 a.m., dragging heavy boxes while customers drifted in half asleep. I tutored middle school kids in basic math. On weekends, I handed out flyers on the street for $10 an hour. I did everything except rest. There were weeks when I survived on instant noodles, where dinner was only whatever free bread the diner let employees take home. There were nights when the room I lived in was too cold to sleep, and I ended up at the Seattle Public Library pretending to study while actually drifting off in the corner until security tapped my shoulder. I wasn't homeless, but I hovered one wrong step away from it. Every time I thought about calling home, my father's voice replayed in my head, "We'll see how long she lasts without this family." I refused to give him the satisfaction. I refused to crawl back just to become another "I told you so" in his long list of things he believed he was right about, so I never called. But my mother, she tried, in her own small, trembling ways. Once every few weeks, I'd receive a text always after midnight, always brief, always typed as if each word cost her a piece of courage she didn't have much of. "Are you eating enough? Did you find work? I miss you. Are you safe?" And once, "I'm proud of you. Even if I can't say it here." I stared at that message for a long time, my throat aching in a way I didn't know how to describe. I replied only with, "I'm okay, Mom." I didn't add that I'd skipped meals that week, or that I'd worked 3 shifts in 24 hours, or that my hands shook from exhaustion. I didn't want to put her in the impossible position of choosing between her daughter and the man she feared. Because I knew she would choose him not out of love, but out of survival. That was what hurt the most. Not my father's rejection. That part was predictable. Expected, practiced. But my mother's silence, the one she lived inside like a cage she never escaped, cut deeper than anything he ever said. She cared. I never doubted that. But caring and protecting are not the same. And I learned early that her love had limits drawn by fear. Still, those text messages kept me going. Even when everything else fell apart. My second year in Seattle was a little less suffocating, though not by much. I moved into a cheaper basement studio with mold in the corners and a heater that worked only when it felt generous. I bought my first used laptop from a pawn shop after saving tips for 4 months. It took 15 minutes to boot up, the fan rattled, and half the keys stuck unless you hit them with force. But it was mine. And for the first time since leaving home, I felt like I had a tool that could build a future instead of just survive the present. I started teaching myself programming at night, watching tutorials until my eyes blurred. I built tiny apps, most of them terrible, but each one was a step, a stone in a path I didn't fully see yet. Sometimes, when I opened my code editor, I felt like I was returning to the only place in the world where things made sense. During those years, I changed in ways I didn't notice at the time. I stopped expecting kindness. I stopped waiting to be understood. I learned how to fix things alone, how to fail alone, how to start again alone. I became someone who didn't need permission to exist. But I also carried new wounds. And old ones that never healed. I carried the feeling of being the child on the left side of the dinner table, the one who needed guidance, the one who wasn't good enough. I carried the memory of Alexis smirking as an entire conference room laughed at me. I carried my father's voice telling me that my dreams were childish, that my intelligence was useless, that I was wasting time pursuing anything he didn't understand. And I carried my mother's eyes, the sorrow in them, the apology she never spoke aloud. All of that pain became fuel. Not anger, not revenge. Just fuel. Something that hardened into determination, into focus, into a quiet promise. I repeated every time I fell asleep in a library chair or folded laundry at a laundromat while waiting for my next shift. I will not need them. I will build something of my own. I will not disappear. By the time I turned 22, the tears came less often. I still struggled. I still missed my mother, but I had survived 4 years. My father swore I wouldn't survive 4 weeks. I had not called home once. I had not asked for help. I had not broken. And, without realizing it, I had become the one person my father never imagined I could be. Independent. Completely, irrevocably independent. The kind of independent that only grows from being pushed out the door into a storm and learning how to stand when no one comes looking for you. The acceptance email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 6:14 a.m., right as I was coming off my overnight shift at the pharmacy. I remember because my hands were still shaking from scanning inventory for 8 hours straight, and at first I thought the notification was just another coupon alert or billing reminder. But when I saw the subject line, "Congratulations, full scholarship award," my breath stopped so suddenly it hurt. I reread it twice, then a third time, clinging to each word as if it might vanish if I blinked too slowly. The University of Washington was offering me a full-ride scholarship to study computer science, tuition, housing, books, everything. Me, Maddie Carter. The girl on the left side of the dinner table. The girl who sorted blocks with a robot her father called a toy. The girl her sister laughed at in a boardroom full of strangers. I walked outside into the cold Seattle morning, the sky still smeared with the last traces of night, and for the first time in years, I felt possibility. Not hope, that was still too fragile a word, but possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, I had not been wrong about myself all along. College was not easy, but it was the closest thing I'd ever had to a real home. For the first time, people didn't look at me like a misfit. Late nights in computer labs felt calmer than any childhood bedroom I'd ever slept in. Professors encouraged me, not because I was a Carter, but because I understood the language of code instinctively, like it had been waiting inside me all my life. I worked part-time to cover food and personal expenses, but compared to the years before school, it felt almost luxurious. I had a dorm bed, a cafeteria, a desk, warmth, and I had purpose. My days were lecture halls and algorithms. My nights were coding projects and tutoring sessions. My weekends were hackathons, where I'd show up with a laptop that still wheezed when it opened and leave with new ideas scribbled on napkins and scrap paper. I wasn't the smartest person in the room, but I was always the hungriest. Hunger beats talent. Hunger outlives privilege. By the time I graduated, I had built a small prototype of a security tool, a basic anomaly detection system that could flag suspicious activity in company networks faster than existing solutions. It was ugly, incomplete, and full of bugs, but one professor saw something in it. He introduced me to a local angel investor, a woman named Serena Cho, who listened to my pitch while drinking black coffee in a cafe with sticky tables. "I don't invest in perfection," she said after I finished. "I invest in scrappy survivors who refuse to quit." She slid her card across the table. "Raise a seed round. I'm in." That was the moment Nordwind Security was born. The name came from a book my mother used to read me when I was little. It was a made-up word, something about winter winds and quiet strength. I never told anyone that. I never told my mother, either. I didn't tell her anything back then. I couldn't. The seed round was small by Silicon Valley standards, just enough to hire a few engineers and rent a cramped coworking space that smelled of stale coffee and sawdust from the construction next door. But to us, it felt like the beginning of something bigger than our budget, bigger than our risk, bigger than the bruised, stubborn girl I used to be. The first year was chaos. Systems crashed. Code failed. Investors doubted us. I doubted myself every other day. But each time that voice whispered maybe Dad was right, I shut down the thought with another hour of coding, another pitch deck revision, another sleepless night. I refused to let the narrative he carved into me become true. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted. A mid-sized retail chain, ironically, not unlike Carter House, suffered a security breach. Their systems were down. Customer data at risk, chaos everywhere. We reached out, sent a demo, offered help. In 48 hours, Nordwind's scrappy little tool isolated the breach pathway faster than their internal team could. The company became our first major client. The story hit a small tech blog, then a larger one, then a cybersecurity site. Suddenly, reporters were emailing us, asking for interviews. Suddenly, I was the face of something real. One headline read, "Young founder builds the most promising security startup in the Pacific Northwest." Another said, "The woman who can outthink a hacker." I printed that one. I taped it above my desk. But even as Nordwind grew more clients, more investment, more articles. I never reached out to my family. Not once. I didn't tell them about the scholarship, or graduation, or the startup, or the articles, or the awards. I didn't tell them that I was being invited to speak at conferences, that CEOs were asking for my advice, that people who had once ignored me now quoted my work on LinkedIn. Because I knew exactly what I would hear if I picked up the phone. You're still not Alexis. You still don't understand the real world. You're doing fine, but your sister now, she's exceptional. I had no space left inside me for their comparisons. Their voices had shaped me for too long. I couldn't let them shape my success. So I built in silence. And silence, ironically, became my greatest ally. By 27, Nordwind Security wasn't just surviving, it was scaling. Investors called us one of the top cybersecurity startups in the region. Our anomaly detection tool was being adopted by companies across the West Coast. I had a real office, a real team, a real future. I had become everything my father said I could never be. And yet, the strange thing is, when I looked back at those years, I rarely felt triumph. What I felt was something quieter, more complicated, a recognition that all the pain I had carried, all the nights alone in libraries, all the messages from my mother sent in fear, all the rejection from the house I grew up in, they had forged me more completely than any success ever could. I hadn't just built a company, I had built myself. And I wasn't done yet, not even close. By the time I turned 28, Nordwind Security had become a name people in the tech world nodded at with a mixture of curiosity and respect. We weren't a giant not yet, but we were reliable, innovative, and annoyingly persistent. That persistence opened doors I never imagined I would walk through back when I was sleeping in libraries and eating instant noodles. We began working with venture capital firms, not just as a startup needing funding, but as security consultants. I attended board meetings not as a nervous outsider, but as someone whose voice mattered in rooms filled with people who never once doubted my worth. It was a strange kind of healing, being seen without having to prove my existence. Ironically, that was also the time Carter House began to stumble. Their new luxury retail line, Carter House Elite, launched with fanfare and glossy ads, the kind of campaign my father lived for. But the market didn't respond the way he expected. The branding felt outdated, the designs forgettable, the messaging tone-deaf to the younger generation they were trying so desperately to capture. Within 18 months, what was supposed to be the crown jewel of the Carter empire had become a bleeding wound. They needed capital. Fast. I didn't learn any of this from my family. I learned it from investor circles, from analysts who whispered about declining earnings, from market reports that painted a slow-motion collapse. And then one day, over lunch with a partner at a mid-sized venture firm, I heard the magic words, "Carter House is seeking private investors. They're desperate enough to take almost anyone." I didn't react. I stirred my coffee. I nodded, but something heavy settled in my chest, something that felt like the past reaching out, brushing my shoulder with cold fingers. That night, I sat at my desk long after my team had gone home, staring at the Carter House prospectus on my screen. Page after page of numbers that told a story my father would never publicly admit. The empire he built was faltering. Alexis had been promoted to strategic director, 2 years earlier, another title with no substance, but plenty of cost. Their decisions, their arrogance, their inability to evolve, it had all caught up to them. I hadn't spoken to my father or sister in a decade. I hadn't told them about Nordwind, or the scholarship, or anything that mattered. I told myself I didn't care. But as I scrolled through the document, I realized something. If Carter House fell, my mother would fall with it. No matter how much she suffered under my father's control, she was still tied to him financially, socially, emotionally. Leaving him would mean losing everything. And if the Carter empire collapsed, she'd be trapped in the wreckage. I couldn't let that happen. The decision wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to Richard. It wasn't even about justice. It was about protection. The kind a child offers a parent when they finally see the parent's fragility, the kind I had longed to receive but never did. So I made a call. Through a venture fund, we partnered with a fund where my name was nowhere near the paperwork. I acquired a 17% stake in Carter House. Then, slowly, quietly, over the next 18 months, I increased that stake to 31%, enough to influence decisions. Enough to intervene if things went wrong. Enough to protect my mother if the worst came. No one knew. Not the investors. Not my team. And especially not my family. When the deal closed, my father issued a statement to the press, praising a promising new investor with admirable confidence in the Carter brand. He smiled on camera, shook hands with the fund's representative, and gave one of those firm, polished speeches about legacy and trust. He never once realized he was smiling at me. Watching him from my office on a tiny muted livestream window tucked in the corner of my screen felt surreal. His tie was crisp, his posture perfect. He still had the same commanding presence, the same ability to fill a room with his certainty. If he knew the truth, if he knew the daughter he dismissed, humiliated, and shoved out into the rain had just become the single largest private shareholder in his company, he would have lost his mind. But that wasn't why I did it. I didn't want power over him. I didn't need it. I wanted the ability to intervene if he hurt my mother again. Or if the company imploded. Or if Alexis made another catastrophic decision while he blindly praised her. The world didn't need to know I held that power. He didn't need to know. My sister didn't need to know. This power was not for them. It was for me and for the woman who tucked $500 into my pocket the night I ran away and whispered, "I believe in you," even though she couldn't say it out loud in front of the man she married. For the first time in my life, I had leverage. Quiet leverage. Invisible leverage. The kind of leverage that sits in your hands like a blade you never wanted, but are now strong enough to wield if the moment ever requires it. And it would. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But the world has a way of circling back to unfinished wounds. And mine had been bleeding for 30 years. I was 31 the first time I stepped into Carter House as someone who didn't need anything from them. Not approval, not recognition, not a place at their table. I came as the CEO of Nordwind Security, a leader in enterprise protection systems, and one of the very few cybersecurity firms capable of handling a company as sprawling and as vulnerable as Carter House. They had requested a consultation through their vendor portal, having no idea the person behind the name was the daughter they discarded like an afterthought 13 years earlier. If they had known, I doubt the request would have been sent. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, I was hit by the same sterile scent I remembered from childhood. Polished wood, expensive cologne, and the faint chemical bite of ambition. The decor had changed, sleeker lines, updated art, but the atmosphere hadn't. Carter House still carried the same air of superiority, the same curated perfection my father had always worshipped. A young assistant led me to the main conference room. "Mr. Carter will be joining shortly," she said, offering a polite smile that held no hint of recognition. Of course. To her, I was just another CEO. Another vendor. Another meeting on a crowded schedule. And yet, my pulse did its own strange stutter as I stepped inside. Richard Carter arrived 5 minutes late, flanked by Alexis. He looked older, lines carved deeper around his mouth, silver streaking his temples, but the presence was unchanged. He still walked like he owned every room he entered. He still scanned his surroundings with the confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone he respected. His gaze landed on me with the same measured indifference I remembered from childhood. He did not recognize me. "Miss Carter," he said, extending his hand out of courtesy rather than respect. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Carter House is evaluating new cybersecurity partnerships. We appreciate Nordwind's interest." His last name was Carter, my last name, but hearing him speak it so formally felt like a strange kind of irony. Alexis stood beside him, arms crossed, posture perfect. Her hair was styled immaculately, her suit expensive, her expression tight with the kind of arrogance she'd mastered long ago. She stared at me for a full 3 seconds before something flickered across her face, a faint squint, confusion, recognition circling the edges, but she pushed it back with disdain. "This is the CEO?" she asked, her tone dripping condescension. "She looks young." I almost laughed. I had spent years preparing for this meeting without knowing it existed. My father gestured toward the screen. "Let's begin. We're on a schedule." He didn't offer water. He didn't offer a seat. He didn't ask a single personal question. To him, I was a stranger. An unimportant one. I began the presentation, detailing Nordwin's detection algorithms, threat isolation strategies, and real-time network solutions. I spoke with the calm confidence I had earned the hard way through years of exhaustion, growth, trial, error, and eventual triumph. But my father barely looked at me. He spent half the presentation scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up to ask generic questions without substance. Alexis interrupted constantly, her comments sharp and dismissive. "I'm not convinced your system is robust enough," she said, flipping through the proposal with an exaggerated sigh. "We need a partner with more experience handling enterprise-scale infrastructure." Nordwin handled infrastructure 10 times larger than Carterhouse. But she didn't care. She wasn't listening to my words. She was listening to her own prejudice. I kept going. Calm. Steady. Professional. The way I'd learned to be when men like my father underestimated me. Halfway through the meeting, the conference room door opened. My mother stepped inside. For a moment, the world went silent. She froze when she saw me, completely froze, her hand clinging to the edge of the door, as if the sight of me stole all strength from her body. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with something warm and devastating. Recognition. Pride. Regret so deep it looked like it hurt her to breathe. "Maddie," she whispered before she could stop herself. Alexis snapped her head toward her. "Mom, do you mind? This is a meeting." My mother blinked rapidly, swallowing whatever emotion had risen too quickly. I'm sorry, I didn't know the room was occupied." Her voice trembled just enough for me to hear it. "Continue." And comes well." She stepped back into the hallway, but her hand lingered on the doorframe, as if unwilling to fully leave. My father didn't notice any of it. He kept scrolling, flipping, dismissing, too busy performing importance to see the earthquake happening 6 feet from him. Later, when the meeting ended and I gathered my laptop, I stepped into the hallway. My mother was waiting there, pretending to review a stack of documents, her hands shaking so visibly she had to grip the papers with both palms to study them. She looked up at me, eyes shining. "You're here," she breathed, voice soft enough that a whisper would sound loud in comparison. "I'm here for work," I said gently. She nodded, but emotion flooded her expression: joy, grief, apology, awe. She stepped closer, but not too close. She looked over her shoulder twice, checking for Richard like she always had, trained by years of fear. "You look." She paused, eyes tracing my face with a mother's hunger. "You look strong." Her voice cracked on the last word. In that moment, I saw everything she couldn't say. "I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I wish I had left him sooner. You deserved more than I gave." I felt it all. Every unspoken syllable. But before she could say anything more, Richard's voice echoed down the hallway. "Eleanor, we're late for the next meeting." She flinched. It was small, but I noticed and stepped back instinctively, guilt and terror competing in her eyes. She managed a soft, aching smile. "Take care, sweetheart." She walked away quickly, shoulders drawn tight. Spine curved inward like she was carrying the weight of 3 decades of regret. I watched her disappear around the corner. And for the first time in years, I felt the past pressing against the present, not as a wound, but as a storm gathering. Something was coming. Something inevitable. Something the Carter family would never see until it was far too late. The text from my mother arrived the night before the party. It was short, hesitant, typed the way someone writes when their hands are shaking and they're afraid of being seen. "You don't have to come, sweetheart. But I want to see you. Just 5 minutes. Mom." I stared at those words for a long time. 10 years had passed since I walked out of the Carter house dripping with rainwater and resolve, and in all that time, not once had I been invited to anything. Not a birthday. Not a holiday. Not a family dinner. Not a single event where the last name Carter was wrapped in gold and presented for public admiration. I was the ghost daughter, the absent one, the one they edited out of photos and out of conversations. The one they pretended never existed. But my mother, she had never let me go. Not fully. She reached for me in hidden midnight texts, in soft apologies. She whispered only in my direction when no one else was watching. So when she asked quietly, gently, almost apologetically, that I come for 5 minutes, I knew I would go. Not for Richard. Not for Alexis. Not for the image of a family that had never included me. I went for her. Only for her. The Carter House 60th wedding anniversary was an event built for spectacle. It was hosted at a ballroom overlooking the Willamette River, filled with guests in black tie attire, towering floral arrangements, gold-trimmed invitations, and a string quartet playing near the entrance. It was everything my father lived for: grand, polished, extravagant, a celebration of a legacy he believed he had created alone, ignoring the woman who had spent decades shrinking herself so his ego could expand without resistance. When I walked in, the air shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but subtly, like a ripple spreading across still water. People looked at me, not with recognition, but with curiosity. Who was she? Why was she alone? Why wasn't she smiling? I moved through the room quietly, the way I had learned to move as a child, present but invisible, hoping to avoid becoming a target. But anonymity didn't last long. First, it was the whispers. Guests leaning toward each other behind champagne flutes. Isn't that the younger Carter girl? I heard she dropped out of college. No, she moved away, something about not fitting in. She's the odd one, right? The one who never quite measured up? The frigid one. The disappointing one. They said it casually, like they were describing the weather. A harmless conversation topic before dessert. I kept walking, my pulse steady, but something inside me tightened, a familiar ache, as old as childhood dinners on the left side of the table. My father saw me next. Or rather, he saw me and chose not to see me. He stood at the center of a circle of executives, laughing too loudly, shaking hands, pouring wine as if the entire room existed to applaud him. His gaze drifted over me briefly, the way someone glances at a decorative plant not important enough to acknowledge, not interesting enough to question. He turned away. He did not nod. He did not greet me. He did not even offer the polite, distant courtesy one gives a stranger. I was invisible to him, still. Alexis noticed me after that. And, unlike my father, she didn't pretend I didn't exist. She walked toward me, heels clicking against marble. Her dress sparkling like it had been stitched from ego and envy. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Wow, she drawled loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. You actually came. I held my ground. Mom asked me to. She scoffed. Of course she did. She loves fixing broken things. I thank you for watching. Her friends laughed, a cluster of perfectly manicured sycophants who'd never worked a day outside the comfort of their parents' wealth. Before I could respond, Alexis lifted her hand and gestured to the security staff stationed near the entrance. Can someone handle this? She called out. Security, please escort this person out. My chest tightened. Alexis, don't make this difficult, she snapped. This is a family event. You being here makes everyone uncomfortable. Family. She said it like I had never belonged. Maybe I never had. Two security guards approached, apologetic but firm. Ma'am, we've been asked. It's fine, I said quietly, my voice steady. I'm leaving. But before I turned, I scanned the room for the only face I came to see. I found her. My mother stood near the staircase, one hand clutching her necklace, the other trembling against her waist. Her eyes were wide, horrified not at me, but at what was being done to me once again, publicly, cruelly, needlessly. She took one step forward. Then another. Her lips parted, her breath shaky, her hands ready to reach for me. But then she stopped, because Richard was watching. He had turned just enough to catch her movement, and with the smallest narrowing of his eyes, a threat he didn't need to voice, she froze. Completely. Torn between a daughter she loved and a husband she feared. Her agony was raw, visible, almost unbearable to witness. I met her eyes. And for a moment, the room disappeared. There was only the two of us, standing on opposite sides of the life we never got to share. She mouthed something, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a tiny, trembling whisper meant for me alone. "I'm sorry." I breathed out slowly. And I let every sharp, aching piece of my heart soften, not for Richard, not for Alexis, not for the room full of people who believed whatever lies they'd been fed. I forgave her, in that moment. With nothing but a single look. She wasn't my enemy. She had never been. She was a prisoner trying to mother through the bars. So, I gave her the only gift I could. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I didn't make a scene. I simply nodded, letting her know I understood, and turned away. As the guards escorted me toward the exit, the music swelled, people laughed, champagne glasses clinked, and the Carter family continued celebrating the illusion of perfection they had spent 60 years constructing. The night air outside was cold, sharp, biting enough to sting my lungs. I walked down the steps slowly, each one heavier than the last. Something inside me felt like it was collapsing, a quiet shattering that made no sound but echoed through every part of me. I had survived their cruelty as a child. I had survived their rejection as a teenager. I had survived their absence as an adult. But this being humiliated in front of 100 strangers, while the mother I loved stood frozen, unable to protect me, this was the final fracture. The last wound. The breaking point. The moment the past and present aligned so perfectly in cruelty that all denial evaporated. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the realization hit me with devastating clarity. This family would never change. Not for me. Not for anyone. And for the first time, I understood something else, something dangerous, something powerful. I didn't need them to. Because I didn't come here to belong to them. I came to say goodbye. I didn't cry on the sidewalk outside the ballroom. I didn't shake or collapse or look back. I walked straight into the cold night as if the air itself could wash away the humiliation still burning on my skin. My heels clicked against the pavement, steady, sharp, controlled. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to move forward, away, anywhere but there. When I reached the corner of the street, I stopped beneath a flickering lamp, pulled out my phone, and stared at the screen. My mother's text from the night before was still near the top. Just 5 minutes. I want to see you. 5 minutes. That was all she'd asked for. And instead, she watched her husband and her golden daughter treat me like garbage in front of a room full of people she'd spent her whole life trying to impress. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with clarity. A clarity so sharp it felt like a blade. I opened my contact list and tapped the name I had never expected to call that night. Evan Brooks. My most trusted legal advisor. The only person who knew the truth behind the 31% stake. He picked up on the second ring. "Maddie? Are you all right?" My voice didn't tremble. It didn't rise. It didn't break. It was calm, quiet in a way that carried the cold finality of a verdict. "Evan," I said, "activate shareholder rights. Begin the removal process." He inhaled sharply. "Are you sure? Once we start, there's no going back. This will. I'm sure." A beat of silence. Then, "Understood. I'll initiate immediately. 31s is for money litters the Bections and create the Nettards." The call ended. And the world began to shift. The first 24 hours were chaos, but controlled chaos. The kind you unleash when you've spent years preparing for a moment you hoped would never come. Within 12 hours, Carter House stock took a sharp dive, nothing dramatic enough to make the public panic, but enough to make analysts sit up straighter. Their luxury division had been bleeding for months, and a sudden internal conflict, buried deep in the filings Evan strategically leaked, was all it took to rattle investor confidence. By the 18th hour, the first article appeared. "Is Carter House in trouble?" Rumors of a power struggle emerge. By hour 24, the whispers became louder. A mystery shareholder moves against the Carter family. Shakeup looms at Carter House board meeting called. Wendo, who is the silent 31%? When the markets opened the next morning, Carter House stock plunged harder, $340 million wiped out in hours. My phone buzzed nonstop with updates, analysts panicking, shareholders demanding answers, journalists calling anyone who'd ever stepped foot inside the company. Inside the Carter estate, I could only imagine the chaos. Richard shouting. Alexis crying. My mother trying to hold herself together in a house cracking at the seams. I'd spent years thinking about what justice might feel like. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance. Like the world finally realigning in the direction it should have been all along. On the second day, the board initiated an emergency session. On the second night, 3 directors privately contacted Evan. They didn't know who I was. But they knew what 31% meant. Power. Influence. Control. The Carter name, no longer protected. Richard. It threatened him. As the third morning dawned, my inbox was full of messages from the board demanding a meeting with the primary shareholder. They used words like urgent, critical, and non-negotiable. At noon, I agreed. The room was different from the boardroom, where Alexis humiliated me at 18, bigger, sleeker. Designed for power players, not interns. Tall windows overlooked downtown Portland, and the long conference table shone beneath ceiling lights that made everything look colder. I arrived early. When the directors entered, they greeted me with caution, with the kind of nervous respect usually reserved for unknown forces rather than familiar faces. None of them recognized me. I preferred it that way. And then the door slammed open. Richard Carter stormed in first, storm clouds carved into his expression. Alexis stumbled in behind him, makeup smudged, eyes red from either panic or rage or both. My mother trailed in last, shoulders tight, expression unreadable, her palms pressed together like she was praying. Richard's gaze collided with mine, and in the fraction of a second it took for recognition to bloom, the color drained from his face. "You," he hissed. "What the hell are you doing here?" I didn't stand. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I spoke evenly, as if announcing something mundane. "I'm here as the owner of 31% of Carter House voting shares." A choke of disbelief rattled through the room. Alexis staggered a half-step backward. My mother covered her mouth. Richard's expression twisted into something primal. "You?" he roared. "You don't belong in this room. Who gave you permission?" "I did," I replied calmly. 31% gives me that right." Silence. Stunned. Absolute. For a moment, all I heard was the faint hum of the HVAC system. Then one of the directors cleared his throat. "Let's proceed." Richard slammed his fist against the table. "I refuse to be pushed out of the company I built with my own hands. This is my legacy." "Then you should have protected it better," I said, meeting his fury with quiet certainty. Alexis lunged forward. "You're jealous. You've always been jealous. You can't stand that I'm the one, Dad." "This isn't personal," I cut in. "It's business." That wasn't entirely true. But it was the only truth they'd understand. The motion to remove Richard Carter as CEO was read aloud. Then the motion to remove Alexis from her executive role. One by one, board members cast their votes. When it was my turn, I spoke clearly. For both motions, yes. Richard's body went rigid. Alexis let out a broken sound. My mother's eyes filled instantly with tears. 3 more votes followed. Then the chairperson announced. Motion passed. Just like that. 30 years of their cruelty. 30 years of silencing me. 30 years of pretending I didn't exist. And now they were the ones removed publicly, legally, undeniably. My father stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. In a way, he was. "You," he whispered hoarsely. "You did this. You ruined us." "No," I said softly. "You did." I stood, gathering my folder. The board dismissed themselves. Richard collapsed into a chair. Alexis sobbed into trembling hands. My mother, my sweet, broken mother, just looked at me like she didn't know whether to apologize or thank me or fall apart. I didn't stay long. The moment I stepped out of the building, the weight of 30 years lifted, not slowly, not gradually, but suddenly, violently. Like a storm breaking open after holding itself together too long. My life shifted in that instant. Theirs did too. The Carter Empire had fallen. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally chose myself. The boardroom emptied slowly, one director after another slipping out with tight smiles and cautious glances, leaving behind only the wreckage of a family that had spent decades pretending it was unbreakable. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The air felt thick, as if the years of silence, suppressions, wounds, and unspoken truths had crystallized into something visible, something almost heavy enough to touch. My father sat at the head of the table, his chair no longer a throne but a cage. He looked smaller than I remembered, less like the towering figure who had dictated the rules of my childhood, more like a man startled by the sudden collapse of a world he believed he controlled. His hands clenched the edges of the table, knuckles white, breath sharp. "You betrayed this family." He finally spat, voice rough and trembling with anger he was trying and failing to contain. "You betrayed everything we built." I stood across from him, the polished floor gleaming between us like a battlefield line. "I didn't betray anything," I said evenly. "I safeguarded what you were too arrogant to protect." His head snapped up. "Arrogant?" he repeated, as if the word were an insult too foreign to comprehend. "Everything you have, everything you owe to this family." I didn't laugh, but the urge washed through me like a bitter wave. I owe nothing to a family that never wanted me. Alexis let out a strangled cry from her seat near the window. She had collapsed there after the vote, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her breath hiccuping in uneven bursts. "I worked for this company," she sobbed. "I was supposed to inherit it. I earned my place here." "You earned nothing," I replied, not cruelly, just honestly. "You were handed titles you never grew into, and now you're shocked that the world expects more than your father's praise." She recoiled as if slapped. My father surged to his feet. "Get out," he barked. "You're no daughter of mine. You walk out that door, and you're dead to this family." But I had been dead to him since I was 6 years old. Before I could respond, a soft sound broke through the tension. "Stop." My mother. Her voice trembling, but present. Clearer than I'd ever heard it in that house. She stood near the doorway, hands clasped so tightly they shook. Her eyes glistened with tears she'd held back her entire life. "Richard," she whispered, "please, just stop." He turned on her like a storm turning on a vulnerable shoreline. "Not now, Eleanor." But she didn't move. She didn't shrink. She didn't bow her head. Instead, she faced me. "Maddie." Her voice cracked. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have stopped him. I should have fought for you." The pain in her voice, pain she had swallowed for decades, was almost too much to bear. I walked toward her slowly, feeling every step like a heartbeat. When I reached her, she reached for me but then hesitated, as if she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to touch me anymore, whether she deserved to. I didn't hesitate. For the first time in 14 years, I wrapped my arms around her. Tightly. Completely. Without fear. She collapsed against my shoulder, sobbing into my coat, her body shaking with years of guilt, fear, and regret finally released. I held her, not as a daughter seeking comfort, but as a woman offering it. She had been trapped for so long. She had been surviving, not living. When she could finally breathe again, I whispered into her hair. "It wasn't your fault, Mom. You were surviving the same way I was. You were a victim, too." She clung to me harder, something like relief breaking through her tears. I pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Come with me," I said softly. "You don't have to stay with him anymore. You don't owe him your life." For a moment, just a moment, I saw it. Hope. Real, bright, trembling hope. Then she looked past me at my father. His face was unreadable. Anger. Fear. Shock. And beneath it all, something fragile he would never admit. The dawning realization that he was losing the only person who had ever truly been loyal to him. My mother's breath hitched. Her hands shook. The old fear crept back in, slipping around her like a chain. I can't," she whispered. "Not yet." My chest tightened, but I nodded. "Then whenever you're ready," I said gently. "My door is always open." Richard slammed his fist against the table. "You think you can just walk in here, tear everything apart, and walk away?" he roared. "You think you can leave this family?" I turned to him fully, my posture calm, my voice steady. "I didn't tear anything apart," I said. I just exposed what was already broken. His mouth opened, but no words came. For once in his life, he had nothing left to say. "Goodbye, Richard," I said. "Not Dad. Not Father. Just Richard. That's all you ever allowed yourself to be." A2, and presenter, it's sewing. Alexis stared at me, her eyes red, her voice shaking. "You can't do this. You can't just leave us. You can't just—" But she didn't finish. She already knew I could. I stepped past them, past the rage, the guilt, the wreckage, and opened the door. My mother whispered behind me, a fragile thread of sound. "Take care of yourself, sweetheart." I turned back just enough to give her a soft, steady smile. "I will. And one day, you will too." Then I walked out. Not in anger. Not in triumph. But in peace. True peace, quiet, solid, earned. For the first time in my life, I belonged entirely to myself. And the Carter family would never control me again. A year can change everything. Not because time itself is miraculous, but because distance gives you room to breathe, to grow, to see your life with clarity instead of survival instincts. 1 year after I walked out of Carter House for the last time, I was living in a small cedar cabin tucked in the foothills of Montana, surrounded by pine trees, crisp air, and a quiet so deep it felt like another language. Every morning, sunlight filtered through the tall windows, warming the wooden floors as I brewed coffee, watered my garden, and let my dog, an enthusiastic rescue mutt named Scout, rush out into the yard like the world itself was a gift. I had never known peace like this. Not in Portland, not in Seattle, not anywhere near my family. My cabin was simple but perfect, shelves filled with books, a fireplace that crackled every night, a wraparound porch where I drank tea and watched deer wander through the trees. Some mornings, I meditated by the lake, breathing in the cold air until the tightness that had once lived permanently in my chest loosened. Healing wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, like thawing ice softening from the inside out. Nordwind's security had grown too. Faster than I expected, even faster than I wanted some days. We'd become one of the top 5 cybersecurity firms in the Western United States, trusted by companies bigger than I ever dreamed of working with. Articles called me a visionary, a disruptor, the leader shaping the next decade of security tech. It was flattering, but it didn't define me. Success was something I built. It wasn't who I was. Not anymore. Every few weeks, I returned to Seattle not for business, not for meetings, but for my mother. The day she left, Richard was quiet, almost silent. She didn't announce it, didn't scream, didn't make a spectacle of defiance. She simply packed a single suitcase, left her wedding ring on the dresser, and walked out the door of the mansion she had been trapped in for over 30 years. She messaged me that same night. "I did it. I'm free." Those 4 words broke me open in the best way. I helped her rent a small apartment in Seattle, a place filled with windows and soft light, where she could finally decorate the walls with things she loved rather than things she was told to display. A place that smelled like lavender and fresh coffee instead of fear. A place where she could breathe. When I visited her the first time, she cried before she even opened the door. Not the silent, suppressed tears she used to hide in the dark, but tears of release, tears of someone finally stepping out of the shadows. She hugged me tightly, the way mothers hug their daughters when they believe they've been given a second chance. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a mother without conditions or chains. We made a promise: lunch together once a month. No excuses. No cancellations. No Richard. Those lunches became something sacred. We talked about things we had never spoken about before, not because we didn't want to, but because the house we once lived in didn't allow honesty. She told me about the years she felt invisible. I told her about the nights I slept in libraries. She apologized for the silence that had hurt me. I told her forgiveness wasn't an event, it was a decision I made every day, gently, willingly. One afternoon, she said something that stayed with me for months. "I wasn't brave back then," she whispered. "But you were. You saved yourself before you even knew how." I squeezed her hand. "We survived in different ways, Mom. One wasn't better than the other. She cried again, not out of sadness, but out of the relief of finally being seen. The more time we spent together, the more I realized that my childhood wound was not just a story of a daughter unloved. It was the story of two women trying to save each other, separated by fear, reunited by freedom. We talked about things we had never spoken about before, not because we didn't want to, but because the house we once lived in didn't allow honesty. She told me about the years she felt invisible. I told her about the nights I slept in libraries. She apologized for the silence that had hurt me. I told her forgiveness wasn't an event, it was a decision I made every day, gently, willingly. One afternoon, she said something that stayed with me for months. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost or a survivor or an outsider. I felt whole. My mother watched me for a long moment, something tender in her expression. "You look happy," she said softly. "Not just accomplished. Not successful, happy." I smiled. "I am." She nodded, eyes warming the way they used to when she tucked pastries into my room at midnight. Then she reached out and took my hand. "I'm proud of you, Maddie. Truly proud. Not just for what you built, but for who you became." The wind rustled through the pines, carrying her words to places I had once been too afraid to look. I squeezed her hand gently. "Mom." She leaned her head on my shoulder. And in that moment, surrounded by the mountains, the water, the life I built with my own scars and strength, I finally said the words that had been living inside me since the night of the anniversary party. "I went to that party for you. But I left for me. And that was the bravest thing I ever did." My mother closed her eyes and nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. In the quiet, in the sunlight, in the peace we created together, I realized something profound. Leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the life I should have had all along. And I wasn't just free. I was finally beautifully, completely myself.